The year is 66 of the Common Era. Years of direct Roman rule of the land of Israel through governors called procurators have proved to be an unmitigated disaster and a fiasco of immense proportions. The procurators are themselves increasingly corrupt, and their rule is characterized by total ignorance of, if not disdain for, the ways of the Jewish population. They are cruel and insensitive, and their only concern is lining their own pockets. In Galilee and in Judea, a radical party comes forth with radical solutions. They are the Zealots, anti-Roman freedom fighters, whose only desire is Jewish independence from the tyranny of Rome. They have organized an underground guerrilla resistance movement, and they are determined to have their day. The most radical of all the anti-Roman militias are the Sicarii, who carry sicae, or small daggers, concealed in their cloaks. They specifically target not only Romans but fellow Jews deemed to be collaborators with the enemy. The whole land is a powder keg, waiting for the proverbial spark. For one more Roman outrage that will push the captive population over the edge. The Romans' unbridled disdain for the Jewish people brings about a riot in Caesarea in 66 CE. There, the Zealots, a band of un-Hellenized anti-elite Jews, wipe out the Roman-backed elite Greeks who had inhabited the area. In a fit of rage, the Roman procurator of Judea, Gessius Florus, plunders the Holy Temple in Jerusalem to fund the cult of Caesar. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus Flavius describes it.
Florus, determined to drive the people to revolt, extracted 17 talents from the temple treasury, claiming government necessity. The infuriated people rushed to the temple, shouting their contempt for the procurator. Some passed around a basket, begging coppers for the poor beggar Florus. In response, Florus marched on Jerusalem, thinking this a good chance to pillage the city. The troops not only sacked the market, but broke into the houses and massacred the occupants. The city ran with blood, and 3,600 men, women, and children were cruelly slaughtered or crucified.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, speaking of the Kittim, a code name for the Romans, have long proclaimed such horrors, citing the ancient prophet Habakkuk. For them, it's all a great conflict between the sons of light and the sons of darkness.
The Kittim shall cause many to perish by the sword, young people, grown men, the aged, women and children, and shall take no pity even on the fruit of the womb.
There is even a militant apocalyptic war scroll among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The official beginning of the Great Revolt against Rome takes place when, in Josephus' words,
a party of the most rebellious spirits now attacked Masada and killed the Roman guards after capturing it.
The flames of revolt spread. Roman legionnaires are next expelled from Jerusalem, and soon they are forced out of all Judea and the whole of Galilee. The nation mobilizes for war. Menachem, son of Judas the Galilean, arrives in Jerusalem after he has secured Masada with its stores of arms. Eleazar, son of Ananias, the temple captain, orders the sacrifice for the emperor to cease, thereby giving the signal for open revolt. Some of the more moderate Pharisees, such as the famed sage Yochanan ben Zakkai, are horrified. As most of the nation takes up arms in defiance of Rome, some deliberately refuse to join the rebels. Back in Rome, the Emperor Nero is appraised of the tide of revolt sweeping Judea. He commissions the venerable General Vespasian, conqueror of Germany and Britain, to take command of the legions in Syria and subdue the rebellious Jews in Judea. Vespasian, in turn, dispatches his son, named Titus, to Alexandria in Egypt to bring up the 15th Legion stationed there. The Dead Sea Scrolls have long foretold the nature of the dreaded Kittim, who now begin to march in force against the land of Israel.
The clamor of their shouting is like the bellowing of many waters, like a storm of destruction devouring a multitude of men, as their waves rear up, not in vanity spout upward to the stars.
An eyewitness of the events of those years, Josephus tells in his own words what now transpires.
The Roman force sent to Galilee ravaged the surrounding country, causing me and my men serious difficulties. I did attempt an assault on the Romans but was repulsed. This provoked fierce hostility from the Romans, who now spread blood and fire over all of Galilee, killing any who were capable of bearing arms.
Other calamities follow, as Galilee and Samaria are reduced to ruin. A terrible heat wave and drought occurs in the summer of the year 67 CE, as the sacred land is turned into an inferno of thirst. Nature herself has taken leave of her senses. Josephus tells it.
Misfortunes also befell the Samaritans, who had not joined in the revolt, but were thinking of rebellion and had collected a great force. It was midsummer, and the Samaritans, who had taken no provisions, were short of water, and many literally died of thirst, while others deserted to the Romans.
The horrors continue. Back at Jodfat, also known as Jotapata, the siege engines proceed in their relentless assault.
The Romans showed no mercy to the defenders. They ruthlessly slaughtered the Jews, and many of my men chose suicide to capture. On the following days, the Romans searched the hiding places, butchering all but women and children, of whom 1,200 were taken prisoner. The capture and siege had claimed 40,000 Jewish lives, and Vespasian ordered Jotapata razed, reducing all its forts to ashes.
Josephus, who with a band of holdouts has been hiding in a cave, describes the subsequent events.
When I was about to surrender, those in the cavern pointed their swords at me and threatened to kill me as a traitor if I submitted. They ran at me from all sides, and, with their blades at my throat, I finally warded them off with my general's authority. If we must die, I then said, let it not be by our own, but by each other's hands. Let us draw lots, and the one who draws the first lot will be killed by him who draws the second, and so on, so that no one escapes. They readily agreed, and I drew lots with the rest. Each one in turn bared his throat to the next, until, should one say by fortune or by the providence of God, I and one other man remained alone. Together, we surrendered, and I was brought before Vespasian.
From this point on, Josephus tries to use his persuasive powers to convince the nation to give up, lest they all face a fate similar to those in Galilee. But Josephus, just as he fears, is branded a traitor. The last bastion of the north is a rocky precipice which rises in the heights to the east of the Sea of Galilee. It's shaped like the hump of a great camel, a gamal in Hebrew, and hence it's called Gamla. An almost impregnable fortress, its Jewish defenders fight heroically against the advancing Romans. Many of Vespasian's soldiers take refuge on the roofs of houses which line the steep slopes. But the houses collapse from the weight, and great numbers are buried in the rubble. Many of the Jewish defenders who do not die in battle leap to their deaths rather than surrender to the Romans. It is a catastrophe. The year is 68 CE. Vespasian's son, Titus, now arrives from Egypt, the 15th Legion in tow. It is at this point that the Roman armies advancing on Jerusalem via Jericho approach the ancient settlement known today as Qumran, which is possibly the Essene headquarters. the Romans are intent on besieging Jerusalem, and they must eliminate all resistance along the way, including the pietistic community on the shores of the Dead Sea. The Essene settlement is abandoned, its inhabitants likely making their way due south toward the rocky precipice which juts from the Judean wilderness, Masada. But numbers of other Essenes, the stragglers, are captured. Josephus relates,
Racked and twisted, burned and broken, and made to pass through every instrument of torture in order to induce the Essenes to blaspheme their lawgiver or to eat some forbidden thing, they refused to yield to either demand, nor ever once did they cringe to their persecutors or shed a tear. Smiling in their agonies, they cheerfully resigned their souls, confident that they would receive them back again.
While Vespasian is preparing to march on Jerusalem, news reaches him of Nero's assassination. In time, he returns to Rome, and after a period of disorder, political turmoil, and chaos, becomes emperor in his own right. He leaves his son Titus behind in Judea to finish the siege of Jerusalem. While the siege was yet underway, Yochanan ben Zakkai decided to feign death and had his disciples carry him out of the city in a coffin. They told the Romans that they were only interested in burying their rabbi. The Romans agreed to let them go, whereupon the great sage himself stood up from the coffin, insisted that he had never had any part in the revolt, and asked that he be allowed to establish a school for the study of the Torah in the town called Yavne, or Jamnia. The Romans agreed, and in this way Yochanan ben Zakkai managed to save Judaism and the Jewish people from extinction. Inside the fortress city, there are no less than 3 zealot factions, warring and firing flaming missiles at each other. The zealots, led by John of Gischala, further engage the population to participate in the revolt by burning the crops and dried foods that the Sadducees and Pharisees had stored in expectation of the Roman siege.
The missiles shot by the catapults, stone throwers, and quick firers flew all over the temple, killing priests and worshippers at the very altar itself. For despite war, the sacrifices went on, and those who had journeyed from all over the world to worship there sprinkled the altar with their own blood. The 3 warring camps regularly rushed out and burned each other's food supplies. Thus the area around the temple became a mass of ruins, and great stores of grain, which would have supplied the besieged for years, were destroyed, and the city would fall to self-imposed famine.
The Roman military machine is unstoppable. With Vespasian now in Rome, Titus brings the 12th and 15th legions from Mount Scopus to the north, circling to the west and finally battering down the city's most vulnerable third wall. The populous new quarter is quickly overrun. A Roman siege wall is now constructed around the rest of the city, ringing it in a macabre grip of death. Josephus implores the people to surrender.
Titus sent me to negotiate with the Jews in their native tongue. I therefore went around the wall, keeping out of range of projectiles and yet within earshot, and implored the people, "Spare yourselves, your country, and your temple." But during my address, many on the ramparts derided and cursed me, while others threw missiles at me. The people cried, "As long as we continue to breathe, we will continue to damage the Romans in every way possible." Famine now raged in the city, and the rebels took all the food they could find in a house-to-house search, while the poor starved to death by the thousands. People gave all their wealth for a little measure of wheat, and hid to eat it hastily and in secret so it would not be taken from them. Wives would snatch the food from their husbands, children from fathers, and mothers from the very mouths of infants. No other city ever endured such miseries. Not since the world began was there ever a generation more prolific in crime than this bastard scum of the nation who destroyed the city.
Next, the Romans set the gates of the temple court on fire and rush onto the broad plateau on which the temple stands. There is hand-to-hand fighting in the holy courts as thousands more fall by the sword. On August 6th, 70 CE, the perpetual sacrifice ceases in the temple. Josephus adds,
Around the altar were heaps of corpses, while streams of blood flowed down the steps of the sanctuary.
The Roman soldiery, maddened with rage, murder all who come within reach and hurl their firebrands into the holy sanctuary. Titus, unable to control his own legions and urged by curiosity, penetrates the Holy of Holies.
When Caesar could not restrain the fury of his soldiers, he and his generals entered the structure and viewed the holy place of the sanctuary, and all the splendors it contained.
Titus now reveals himself as a true son of destruction, for his next act is to order the burning of the temple. Here's where we have to look askance at Josephus' accounts, for it makes it seem as though Titus pleaded with his men to spare the temple. But we have to consider that Josephus is writing as an apologist for the Flavian court in Rome, and he's known for stretching the truth where it suits him. The truth is, we know from other ancient sources that Titus did in fact give the order for the temple to be burned, an act which would take its place as the central tragedy in all of Jewish history. Let's note what Josephus says about the many people who are indeed led astray.
The Romans now set fire to all the surrounding buildings, the remains of the porticos and gates, and the treasury chambers, where vast sums of money had been deposited. They then moved on to the one surviving portico at the outer court, where 6,000 women and children had taken refuge. They had gathered there because of a false prophet, who had told them that God commanded them to go to the temple, where they would receive guarantees of deliverance. Before Caesar had made up his mind what to do with these people, the soldiers set fire to the colonnade, and not a soul escaped.
As a tragic footnote to the carnage, Josephus records,
Titus then destroyed the rest of the city and razed the walls. Those who died during the siege were 1,100,000. The greater part of these were of Jewish blood, but not natives of the city, because just before the siege, people had flocked into Jerusalem from all parts of the country for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They found themselves engulfed in the war and overcrowding that produced pestilence and famine. So ended the siege of Jerusalem.
After the temple is burned and Jerusalem is leveled to the ground, the last holdouts against the Romans, the Sicarii, and the remnants of the Essenes, take their last stand on the rocky plateau called Masada. Vespasian's son, Titus, has himself gone back to Rome to participate in a triumphal procession through the Forum, showing off the spoils of the Judean campaign. In his place is the new governor of Judea, Flavius Silva. Josephus fills in the grisly details of the subsequent events.
Masada stood on a high rock, which was surrounded by deep ravines. The fortress was well stocked with provisions, enough to last for years, and enough arms for 10,000 men. It could be reached by only two narrow and difficult paths, from the Dead Sea on the east and from hills to the west. The former path they call the Snake, since it resembles a reptile in its narrow windings until it finally reaches a plain at the summit on which Masada stood. Flavius Silva immediately built a wall around Masada and guarded it with sentinels to prevent the besieged from escaping.
However, Silva's siege wall doesn't solve the problem of how to defeat the defenders. He cannot scale the rock without boulders and hot oil being hurled down at him from above. Undaunted, he orders his soldiers to construct an enormous earthen ramp from the bottom of the ravine to the very precipice. After 7 excruciating months of siege, he brings a huge battering ram up the ramp and begins pounding away at the wall which rims the fortress. The fate of the defenders within is at last sealed. Yet capitulation is ruled out. Better to die than to face the utter humiliation of slavery and to admit that their hopes of supernatural deliverance are in vain. In the end, Death does not flee from these freedom fighters. The rebel commander, Eliezer ben Yair, makes a final, fanatical appeal to the assemblage of Sicarii and Essenes.
Long ago we decided to serve neither Roman nor anyone else except God. And now the time has come to verify that resolution by action. We who were the first to revolt and are the last in arms against the Romans must not disgrace ourselves by letting our wives die dishonored and our children enslaved. We still have the free choice of a noble death with those we hold dear. When they are gone, let us render a generous service to each other. Life, not death, is man's misfortune, for death liberates the soul from its imprisonment in a mortal body. Why then should we fear death, who welcome the calm of sleep? Let us die as free men with our wives and children, and deny the Romans their joy of victory. Let us rather strike them with amazement at our brave death.
With that, Eliezer's hearers rushed away like possessed men, and began the bloody work.
Josephus continues his melancholy account.
While they embraced their wives and took their children in their arms, clinging in tears to their parting kisses, they killed them. When all were put to death, they gathered together their effects and set them on fire. Then they chose by lot 10 of their number to kill the rest. They lay down beside the dead wives and children and, flinging their arms around them, offered their throats to those who slaughtered them all. The 10 then cast lots, and he on whom it fell killed the other 9. He finally drove his sword through his own body.
When Silva and his soldiers at last break through the walls and enter the compound, their ears are confronted only by a deafening silence. All 960 of the defenders, consisting of zealots and the last of the Essenes, lay dead in the parched and desiccated dust. Only 2 women and 5 children, who hid themselves in a cistern, survive to tell the story. In the final analysis, the horrors of those days will be remembered as the greatest catastrophe to befall the Jewish people up until the Holocaust. But a vibrant, modern state of Israel has risen from the ashes in the middle of the 20th century, and there is a new oath in the air. A practice was initiated of holding the swearing-in ceremony of the Israeli Armored Corps soldiers who had completed their basic training on top of Masada. The ceremony ends with the declaration, Shnia lo tipol Masada. Masada shall not fall again. That's the way it was, and that's the way it is.